Hey, it's Big T, and welcome to lesson 5 of how to tie flies. So today we are going to put together a woolly booger. So what we'll be doing is building upon a couple of fundamentals we've already gone over, which first we're going to apply and measure our tailing material and tie that in. Then we'll go with using some dubbing as our body. Traditionally, a chenille has been used for that. And you would tie in a chenille and wrap it similar to the wire ribbing that we wrapped in on our waltz worm that we recently did last episode. I like to use dubbing a lot of times because I feel like it creates less bulk on the fly and helps it to sink faster. And then the new fundamental we'll be learning today will be palmering a feather around to create that portion of the body of the woolly booger. So that's the plan today. I will probably use a little bit of lead wire just to show you how to apply that. So those will be the two major things that will be new today, and hopefully you've been following along. And let's go to the vise. Okay, let's get started. We are going to be using a 3X. It's a 3X nymph for streamer hook. See if that'll focus at all. There we go. Size 8. Other hooks that you might be able to use, you can use that in, let's say, a size 12, 10, 8, 6, even up to a 4. And I'm going to use a 3.8 millimeter countersunk red tungsten bead on this fly. Color choice is up to you. I like red. It just seems to give a nice little trigger to the fly. And we're going to apply the hook in the vise again, securing it down well at the bend. First thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get a little bit of lead wire and apply that. And let's show you how we're going to do that. This is a 0.30 rather. Lead wire. I'm going to come on the front side of the hook away from me, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch this tail and start wrapping around, touching turns, and I'm going to put about 10 or so wraps on the hook. That's going to take it down to about 2/3 of the way down the hook. Now the way you can cut this with your trash scissors, I'm actually going to put my thumbnail up against it and rotate it and break it off. Okay? Now that we've done that, I'm going to push this together and really compress that. And I still have this little pigtail here that you can either wrap around or cut off. I've chosen to wrap around it, just don't like to waste any materials if I don't have to. So we've got that secured in nicely, and now it's time to start our thread. For this particular application, I'm just going to use a 70 denier black thread. You may want to use something a little heavier since this is a bigger fly, especially when you're starting out. I'm actually going to start this thread behind our lead wraps. Again, wrapping backwards over our tag and trimming the excess. And now I'm going to come over top of the lead and potentially in between the lead wraps, behind the bead, and then back over top of the lead. And I'm going to do this several times, and the reason for this is I want to really secure that lead wrap in nicely. What I don't want it to do is twist and turn around a lot. Anytime you're using lead, it could have the propensity to twist around the hook shank and change the look of the fly. Alright, and now I'm going to wrap back to the bend of the hook, and we're going to apply our tail to the woolly booger, which we're going to use woolly booger marabou. this is what that feather looks like, because I'm going to also show you what blood quill marabou looks like. That's a pretty fluffy feather there. The blood quill marabou looks more like this, and it's got individual tails. This is certainly something you could use as well. I just prefer the look and movement that this fly gives. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that and pinch the end and start brushing back these fibers so that I've got about a third of that feather moving forward, and I'm going to push those this way and come in and pinch them like this. That way I know roughly the length of the tail I'm going to be using. But to get an exact measurement, I'm going to place it on top here. That looks good to me. I don't like a really long tail. I think you have a tendency to potentially get short strikes. So I've transferred that marabou feather over to my left hand. I'm going to come over top with at least 2, maybe 3 pinch wraps, securing that feather down nicely. And then I'm going to wrap forward a couple times before I trim this feather off. And I'm going to trim it off right there where it meets up with the lead wraps. And come back over top of it. And secure it down nicely. So we've got our tail in, we're back. You may have a little bit of fuzz here. I'm not concerned about that because I'm going to be covering that here shortly. As we discussed before, a lot of times you've got to think kind of backwards, where you tie in materials in the reverse order that you're going to apply them. So we're going to apply a dubbing on this body, and then we're going to hackle or palmer a feather around it. So what I want to do is apply the feather first and then the dubbing. This is some strong saddle hackle, and the feather looks like this. You can use that. You can use, I know Whiting makes a particular pack of feathers specifically for woolly boogers. I'll use a CDC feather. You can use feathers from a cape. But what we're going to do here is I'm going to take this feather pinched in my right hand, and I'm going to pull the fibers backwards so that I've created a little bit of a triangle here. And this triangle is what I'm going to tie in right in front of the tail. And so I'm going to put it on my side of the hook shank and come over top with several wraps. And then I'm going to trim off that excess. Now that we've got that feather applied and tied in well, we're going to come back with our body. This is an area where you could use a traditional chenille. The chenilles can be just a straight chenille. They could be an ice dub chenille. I find those tend to bulk up the fly a little bit, which makes them more buoyant, and they sink a little bit slower. So what I'm going to use today is an ice dub. This is a UV dark olive. It looks a little bit blue until you put it up into the sunlight, in which case it looks olive. And what we're going to do is just grab a little bit more generous of a pinch than we used on our Waltz worm, because we're going to want to apply this a little bit thicker. Again, I'm just rolling my fingers over it. Synthetic dubbings at times can be a little bit finicky. If you find this to be difficult to get on the thread, don't be afraid to utilize a dubbing wax if you need to. So I'm going to put together my dubbing noodle. And then I'm going to be able to begin to wrap that around. Occasionally you may have to twist that back on at the end to make sure you've got it good and secured. And we've created our body. Next, I'll take the saddle hackle and I'm going to palmer this. Palmering is simply taking that feather and wrapping it forward, leaving a small space between wraps. All the way up to behind the bead. Now the space that you leave in between these wraps, that's up to you. I don't like to get too tight and too thick up front because again, it's adding buoyancy to our fly, which reduces the sink rate. So I'm now wrapping this thread behind the stem and then in front of the stem several times to secure it. And then we'll trim off our excess. At this point in time, I like to kind of comb these back and really run a nice thread collar behind that bead. And that's really going to keep everything in tight. And then finally we're going to apply either a whip finish or a half hitch in order to secure all of our materials. And you can apply a head cement or a glue at this point as well if you choose to. Zap-A-Gap is my preferred adhesive. That's it. That's our woolly booger. Adding some lead wraps, palmering a feather. Next week and next lesson, we'll have a little bit of a surprise. I'll put up your materials on the list following this video. I hope you turn in. Please subscribe if you haven't already and share this with your friends. Visit bigtflyfishing.com for all the materials you need. Thanks so much.